That night, I just wanted a drink and some small talk. But there, amid empty laughter and half-full glasses, I heard the sentence that shattered my indifference. "I'm fasting because I'm Muslim." And it kept echoing in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't a sermon. It wasn't an attempt to convert me. It was just a simple answer, spoken with firmness and serenity. But something in it pierced through me, as if my body recognized a truth that my mind still refused to admit. My name is Elliot Rawlings. I'm 46 years old, and I was born in Sheffield, in the north of England. I grew up surrounded by British traditions, attending Anglican churches more out of family habit than conviction. Today, I live in Wakefield, West Yorkshire, and I can say with absolute certainty my life took a turn that no one around me ever expected, not even myself. Before continuing with my story, leave a comment with the city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can reach, because if it reached you, maybe it's time for something new to be born within you too. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that now. On the outside, my life was solid. A new car in the driveway, a comfortable home, a good job in corporate training, a respected, stable, predictable routine. I taught professional development courses in residential programs, usually at hotels. 2 intense shifts, theory during the day, beer at night. I was always surrounded by outgoing co-workers, jokes, football, pubs. Nothing seemed out of place. And I didn't feel like anything was missing either. Faith, until then, was a vague idea, something left behind in childhood, a dusty memory of Sunday school and Christmas carols. I wasn't an atheist, but there was no space for God in my schedule. Live well, treat people with respect, be a decent guy. I thought that was enough. And honestly, it never crossed my mind to change. No crisis, no loss. None of those life shake-ups that usually trigger deep spiritual searches. My life was stable, and in the minds of many men, stability means there's nothing to fix. It was in that exact scenario, safe, comfortable, untouched, that something unexpected began to stir within me. A small gesture, a silence, a simple decision made by someone who crossed my path without making a scene. It wasn't a debate. It wasn't a book. It wasn't a tragedy. It was just an example. An ordinary man who refused to drink at the bar and who carried something in his eyes I didn't know how to name. And that not knowing was what started to eat away at me. That night, everything went on as usual. Loud laughter, inside jokes among co-workers, glasses refilled like sacred rituals of the after-work crowd. But he stayed sober. Not arrogantly, not judgmentally. It was as if his refusal wasn't a challenge to the group, but a quiet loyalty to something greater. And the most disconcerting part, he was at peace. While the rest of us searched for some kind of escape in that noisy environment, he seemed whole, grounded, completely present. His name was Kareem, a Brit like me, but with a completely different background. And it was that strange familiarity that unsettled me. He spoke the same language, laughed at the same things, knew the same cultural codes, but something about him stood apart. It wasn't his accent, or his clothes, or any showy behavior. It was something invisible but deeply real, a kind of clarity, conviction, dignity. That night he didn't hand me a pamphlet, he didn't invite me to a mosque, he didn't try to convert me, he just listened. And when I said that religion was used to control people, that God was just an emotional concept created by those afraid of death, he didn't argue. He simply said, "I used to think that too, until I realized I'd never actually stopped to think it through." That was it, a short sentence, but spoken with a firmness that pierced through my facade of self-sufficiency. I, who always prided myself on my rationality, began to wonder if I'd been living with automatic answers I'd never truly questioned. And there, in front of a man who abstained from alcohol as effortlessly as breathing, my concept of freedom began to crack. I went back to my room that night without fully understanding what had just happened. I only knew that something I couldn't name, had been shifted inside me, and the unease was only just beginning. In the days that followed, I tried to ignore that unsettling feeling. After all, I wasn't searching for religion, purpose, or any kind of spiritual awakening. My life was simple. Wake up, go to work, hang out with friends, repeat. None of that included faith, prayer, or metaphysical questions. But somehow, the encounter with Kareem wouldn't leave my mind. It wasn't what he said. It was how he existed. It was as if his presence had left an invisible mark, like a fingerprint on my consciousness. I found myself starting to see things around me differently. I began to notice the emptiness in conversations, the numbing repetition of parties, the tiredness that lingered even after a fun night out. And for the first time, something inside me whispered, "Is this all?" That question, so simple, so innocent, was like a crack in the concrete of my routine. I saw Kareem a few more times at work. Gradually, I started making conversation. Not about religion, but about life, about choices, about meaning. He never pushed anything, never tried to prove he was right. He just shared his story with a disarming calm, like someone who had found the truth and could now rest in it. It was in one of those conversations that he spoke to me about Islam, not as a set of rules, but as a compass, a way to remember who you are when the whole world is trying to make you forget. He said Islam didn't turn him into a new person. It simply revealed who he had always been, but who had been drowned out by the noise of life. That sentence hit me like lightning, because deep down I also felt like there was something inside me that had been asleep, something that didn't need to be taught, only remembered. And for the first time, I wanted to know more. That unexpected desire to learn more wasn't religious curiosity. It was something different. It felt like something was being unlocked inside me, a shapeless memory, a thirst I hadn't known I carried. So, even without fully understanding why, I decided to accept Kareem's invitation to visit the neighborhood mosque one Friday afternoon. I went with the same mindset as someone visiting a museum, observant, detached, with no expectations, but at the door something broke through that armor. It wasn't the place itself, or the architecture. It was the way I was welcomed. No one interrogated me. No one tried to convert me. They just shook my hand respectfully, smiled, and said, "Welcome, brother, brother," a word I hadn't heard in a long time, and never with such weight. I sat in the back, trying to stay discreet. The atmosphere was quiet but alive. It wasn't like a church where everyone waits for someone to take the pulpit. Here, the men were kneeling, some reading the Quran, others just sitting in silence. The simplicity of the place, the absence of images, of distractions, it all seemed stripped of excess so that something greater could fit there. Then the khutbah, the Friday sermon, began. The imam spoke about sincerity, not religion as tradition or label, but as inner truth. If you say you believe, but don't live as if you believe, then you're just reciting lines. And God doesn't read your words. He reads what's behind them. I felt that like a punch to the stomach, because that was exactly how I had grown up, reciting prayers, pretending faith without conviction. When it ended, an older man approached me. He offered me water and said, "What matters isn't where you came from, son. It's where you're going." That day, I left the mosque without any conversion, no promises, no concrete answers. But something invisible had already left with me, the certainty that I needed to come back. After weeks of watching videos, reading articles, and trying to understand the structure of Islam, something curious began to happen. It wasn't a crisis, nor a grand revelation. It was subtler, as if slowly the religion had been observing me first. It wasn't me desperately chasing answers. It felt like the answers had been waiting for me all along. And that bothered me, because I grew up believing that faith required effort, sacrifice, intellectual struggle. But there, in front of those simple videos of converts telling their stories, in the logical explanations about the oneness of God, in the straightforward descriptions of Muslim prayer, I realized Islam wasn't trying to convince me. It was just showing me something I had always carried but never named. I found myself silently agreeing with things I would have once mocked. When one Muslim speaker explained that God doesn't need to lower himself to human level to forgive, that he simply forgives when there is sincere repentance, that made more sense to me than any sermon I had ever heard in church. It was direct, no metaphor, no performance. Even more so, the way Muslims spoke of discipline, purity, intention. It touched a part of me I didn't even know existed. It wasn't guilt, it was dignity, as if each practice existed not to punish, but to restore the human being to what they were meant to be. That's how I began to feel that Islam wasn't confronting me with fear, but with truth. A truth that didn't need to shout, because it was already whispering inside me. I just hadn't paused long enough to listen. That night, after watching another video about the meaning of Tawheed, the absolute oneness of God, something inside me fell silent. It wasn't confusion nor euphoria. It was silence, a pure silence, as if all excess had evaporated from my mind. It was in that state that, for the first time, I knelt. Not knowing exactly how, but knowing why. I didn't speak much. I didn't use rehearsed words, nor follow a specific script. I simply put my face in my hands and said, "If you are as real as they say, show me what to do." There was no thunder, no overwhelming emotion, but there was also no doubt. I slept in peace, and for someone like me, who carried years of anxiety, that was a quiet miracle. The next morning, I woke up different. I didn't feel converted. I didn't even know if I could call myself Muslim, but something had changed. My search stopped being theoretical. Now it was personal, and more, it was practical. I started researching how Muslims pray. I watched tutorials, read articles, listened to Quran recitations, and for the first time in my life, I cried listening to words I didn't even understand. It was as if my soul already knew the language before my brain did. And that shook me. How could a faith I had criticized so much, that I had feared so much, welcome me without demanding any performance? I began performing wudu before prayer. It felt almost symbolic. I cleansed my body in an attempt to find a clean mind too. Each gesture reminded me that God was watching, and that awareness was light, not oppressive. It was as if someone had finally turned on the light in a room where I had been stumbling around. From that day on, prayer became my refuge. Even without knowing a word of Arabic, even without understanding everything, the very act of standing before God, in the most sincere way I knew, was already a step. And deep down I realized Islam wasn't waiting for perfection. It was waiting for surrender. A few days after that first awkward prayer, I went for a walk. I just wanted to clear my head, maybe get coffee, maybe tune out the world for a few hours. But God has a unique way of interrupting routines. It was on that ordinary day that I ran into that man from the bar again, the same one who weeks before had unintentionally sparked the flame. This time he saw me from afar and smiled. He called me by name, invited me to sit down. He had nothing to sell, no pamphlet, no forced sermon. He just asked, "How have you been since that day?" I hesitated, but then I took a deep breath and told him everything. The video, the prayer, the messy emotions. He listened in silence, without interrupting, without overreacting. And at the end, he said something that still echoes in me today. Sometimes God doesn't call us with thunder. He just puts someone in our path to remind us what we already knew inside. It was the first time I heard the word fitra, the idea that every human is born with a natural awareness of God, but that society, ego, and fear bury that voice. "You're not learning something new," he said. You're remembering. He asked if I'd considered taking the next step. I said yes, but that I was scared. Scared of change. Scared of not being accepted. Scared of disappointing the people who knew me. And he replied with the calmest tone, "You don't need to have all the answers to surrender to the one who has them all." Before leaving, he gave me a book and said he was available for any questions. We shook hands, but it was much more than that. It felt like sealing a silent pact with destiny. From that moment on, I knew either I dove in completely or I would spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I had trusted. That night, back in my room, the silence felt heavier than ever. The book he had given me, its pages yellowed, filled with notes, sat on the table. But more than its contents, it was the gesture that marked me. Someone had trusted me enough to plant a seed without asking for anything in return. I picked up the book with trembling hands. I read a few random excerpts, and then, without overthinking it, I closed my eyes and whispered, "God, if this is true, give me peace. Not just any peace, but the kind that silences the chaos inside." No visible miracle happened. No light, no voice, but something within me quieted down. For the first time in years, I went to sleep with a light heart, and it was in those early hours of the morning that I made my decision. The next day I would go to the mosque, alone, no announcements, no audience. I went with my heart in my hands. Every step felt like it weighed a ton. But when I walked in, something welcomed me. Not the walls, not the looks, but the atmosphere. It was as if the entire space breathed reverence. A man greeted me with a smile and asked if it was my first time. I nodded, and he simply said, "You're welcome here, just like every child of Adam." Minutes later, someone explained to me what the Shahada was, the testimony of faith, a simple yet powerful declaration acknowledging that there is no deity but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger. I trembled. I thought about everything I was leaving behind, but I also thought about everything that was finally making sense. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, with a soul at peace, I repeated those words. In that simplicity, I found a truth that no argument had ever offered me, and in that moment, the skeptical young Brit ceased to exist and was replaced by someone who, for the first time, knew exactly who he was. It wasn't a loud conversion. I didn't post it on social media. I didn't tell my whole family right away. But the truth has a subtle way of revealing itself, even when we try to hide it for a while. In the days that followed, my habits began to change. I turned down invitations to bars. I started to pray, even if silently, even if I wasn't sure I was doing everything correctly. People around me noticed. Some friends mocked me. Others drifted away, but some, the ones I least expected, started asking questions. "You seem calmer. There's something different about you. Why have you been avoiding certain conversations?" Little by little, the transformation began to affect not just me, but my environment. A co-worker who used to mock religion asked me to talk. He said he suffered from anxiety at night and wanted to know how I managed to sleep peacefully. I told him what I had discovered. I didn't push doctrine. I shared relief. That's when I understood a quiet truth. Islam doesn't impose. It spreads through example, through serenity, through the coherence between belief and behavior. Words help, yes, but actions speak louder. My mother, who always thought religion was just tradition, saw me kneeling in prayer once. She didn't say anything, but a few days later she surprised me with a question. "What do you feel when you do that?" I answered without hesitation. "I feel like, for the first time, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And that's how I understood. True faith doesn't need to shout to be noticed. It just needs to be real.